Hello, welcome back to another live. So, we're going to be talking to Jake from DOMA, a co founder, about the editor and director relationship. So, we've been speaking a little bit of how that kind of works. So, I'm quite excited about this one because I think this one's a bit different. So, I'm going to go ahead and invite him in. For those of you who don't know DOMA, they are specify in color grading and editing. And they've worked with quite a lot of brands. But today we're going to be speaking specifically about the director and also like director editor relationship. So if you have any questions, remember always feel free to put them in the comments and we'll get to you, and then we can ask all the questions that we need to and all the things that you are like thinking about and like, is this right? Am I doing this correctly? We can like ask these questions now. Welcome, 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 everyone. Anyone just joining? We are going to be talking to Jake from DOMA about the editor and director relationship. Welcome, welcome. As I was saying before, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We're just getting Jake on just now. Welcome, guys. We're going to be starting in just a second. We're going to be talking to Jake from DOMA, post-production company in London, specifying in color grading. Just waiting for him to join. Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, very good. Thank you so much for
No
coming on.
problem.
So we're going to jump straight in, and we're going to talk a little bit about the editor and director relationship, which I'm
Hmm.
very interested in because I think I specifically want to jump in the deep end and just like essentially say like, how is the relationship usually started?
Hmm.
Because I think because I'm assuming, and I'm going to basically jump in with an assumption, it's different every time.
Hmm.
But from your
Hmm.
side, let me know how sort of like DOMA works and like how essentially directors can work with editors on your side and how it literally
Hmm.
starts from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, it can come in many different ways. I mean, my advice is when you're kind of looking to work with an editor, um, I would start talking to people earlier on in the process of your project. I think we often get people coming in, it could be quite late in the day, but the kind of ideal is that, our editors are having conversations with the director
Mm,
quite earlier on in the process, because the editor will get to understand your creative, your vision. They can kind of offer up any thoughts or ideas, not to be like another director in the equation, but just to sort of help um, and offer up any kind of thoughts. But it really kind of, that's where it would be the ideal. And finding a director is a whole different, ball game in itself. And there's lots of ways kind of into finding people and all sorts of stuff. But it's it, I mean, I can go into that. I don't know where. I don't want to go kind of jump the gun on any further questions you have, but there is a lot. There's a lot to be said about finding people, and that can happen two ways. You can be finding people online and in credits and things like that. But likewise, we always encourage people to come to us. They might be wanting to work with a particular editor that we have, but they might not be available, and therefore we have someone else available. Or if they're a developing talent, developing director as well, there's lots of amazing assistants, not just at our post houses and other post houses as well, that are editors in their own right and looking for that opportunity to grow with someone. So there's ways in which that
Okay.
we can kind of like work on that, which I think,
So
and it all
for
comes
ex-
is
so for
yeah.
example, could it be a situation, because I've often found when going to post houses and the events that we've ran before as well, when working with post houses, could it be a situation where a director could come and essentially, literally at the start, they've got their treatment, they've got their script. Could they reach out at that stage, or would it be preferential to reach out at that
I
stage? Like
think
literally.
I think so. I mean, my idea, 100%. I think we're always game. Like the early kind of stages that we get with some people depends on our relation. We've got good relationships with people who are pitching on stuff, and they're kind of knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, we're pitching for this. We'd love to work with you guys. Here's a little bit of an insight into kind of what that's going to be." I mean, that's the best place to start. Obviously, it it just means that one, we're making sure that we've, in a really kind of like straightforward sense, got dates in mind, making sure that we're like penciling dates for you to work with the person that you want to work with. um, and we can also just start any conversations around any of the stuff related to the post production as well. There might be things that we need a bit more foresight on, not just from the editing side, but into kind of like any VFX animation. There is I think also, just to go on a tangent, there is, a lot of people are multi-skilled now. So there's a lot of like, editors who can do a bit of animation, do a bit of VFX. And every editor's different. Some people might have that skill set. Some people might have another skill set, a bit more sound design focused. Some people might be true to just being a straight editor. And there might be something in your treatment that you might assume an editor could do, or and certain editors might be able to, and some might not be able to. So
Mm,
there is a bit of like, in a really like, what are you trying to achieve, and how can we ensure that you're working with the right people for it as well. So that comes from an early phase contact, rather than being like, right, we're like kicking off the edit in like 2 days or tomorrow. We get those and we try and make those work, and sometimes they work, but it's not our favorite.
so essentially what you're saying is, as you said, early as possible, early doors as possible, if not in the conception. And I think that's probably everyone's dream scenario anyway, because you want to be able to be like, okay, anyone who's working on the project, you can put your best foot forward. You can put things in place and be like, hey, we've got this project, we can allot this time because you've come to us at the conception stage. So essentially what you're saying is, hey guys, any directors listening, please don't think of us as a last resort.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to go a bit more into the practical side of things.
Yeah.
Um, now obviously there are different ways that different directors
Hmm.
work, and there are some ways that are more favorable than others, and there is the concept of, like, I know, the backseat editor. And
Mm.
sometimes what in terms of, I guess, opening up that conversation of like what is preferred and how should directors approach working with an editor in that kind of
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Should they be beside? Is that preferable? Is that not? Could they still do that if they want
Yeah.
to? What does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, and it's like that age-old question. It's all about a balance. So, when you're working with an editor, you're not working with, someone who's just going to be there to, basically be a pair of hands. You're working with another creative collaborator.
Mm,
So it should be about, um, you know, giving that editor time, one, to process everything, look at all the footage, look at the creative, and gather their thoughts on the direction for it. Um, and I think one big thing that we spoke about here before I jumped on was that make sure you know your footage. So whatever you shot, come to your editor and be like, right, can I get a string out, a sequence of all the footage, the raw footage, so I can have a look. And I think if you're coming into that suite with that editor, having watched your rushes, knowing what you do and don't like, and just have a better feeling for what's been captured, it's good to kind of be confronted with the work that you shot, but it's also good for you to just know. So you've got the shorthand with your editor who's also watched all the rushes to kind
Mm.
of run through what's good and what doesn't feel right. So I think that's a really important part of it. Um,
So I'm
but there
guessing
is,
the notes on set would also help. So if you're like directing, if you're a director listening, it's like have someone take note
Mhm,
of like the good takes, the bad takes, all the kind of
definitely.
the awkwardness of anything that's happened on set, so that then it provides you with as much information as
Yeah.
possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Post shoot notes. We don't always get them, but if we can, we'd love to have them. Otherwise, we'll jump on a call with the director before we kick off just to be like, what happened on set. And it's filmmaking, 9 times out of 10, you had all this ambition, but it maybe didn't happen exactly the same way, or, something really interesting happened on set. So, it's bringing us on that journey a little bit with you so we know what was, a good kickoff point, essentially. So, there was another thing I was going to say, which was, it's. I think it's about, back the kind of, we work with lots of directors as well that are also editors in their own right, and that is like it's a blessing and a curse, because one, they've got great communication in terms, and I think it's really important to know that, um, to kind of understand the editing process in a way, so you're aware of like how long things are taking, what the flow is. So I think it's good. I'm not saying that every director should be, getting their hands dirty in that space and doing that stuff, but I do actually think that it would be, um, you know, the ability to kind of like jump on some of these platforms and just get a feeling for what that process is like is going to help you infinitely as a director. And also, like, lots of editors, might have started their journey as directors. It's definitely a
Mm.
role where I think people, you know it's, very storytelling focused role
Yeah.
in the filmmaking process. So there is that synergy there of like they understand, lots of people have that kind of experience of understanding what that vision is, having worked on things that involve their own vision. There's a good sort of synergy there.
Mm.
Yeah.
In terms of, I would just want to move it more into, I guess, literally the finer details. And anyone who has a
Mm.
question, feel free to ask. If anyone's just joining, I'm joined by Jake, who is from DOMA, co-founder, um, and essentially we're talking a bit about the director and editor relationship. So just moving into that kind of like more finer detail, because what is the preferred way to work in the sense of,
Mhm.
I guess, providing notes? Because I know we have things like
Yeah.
Friend.io, all
Mm.
that kind of stuff. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the process of like, whether that is providing notes, whether that is, is the director seeing the initial cut before the like from the assistant
Mhm.
before the main editor. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, basically, notes, like the way that just a bit of our workflow. So we use Frame. So we use something like Frame. If we're kicking off a project, normally we'll be handing a string out, like I mentioned before, of rushes to the director. You know, maybe they'll make notes on that. Maybe they won't. Maybe it's just a means for them to take a look. Before a session. Then I think, what's always a tricky challenge. Sometimes timelines don't really help with this, but the ideal is that the editor is sitting with this footage for a nice chunk of time to make their selects, take on any notes that you maybe marked up, but then also then has given a little bit of time to get to a cut, because I think the best position you can be in, and as a director coming into a session, is that the editor's got something for you to look at,
Mm,
and has pieced something together. And I think that means that as well, someone's looked at your footage, without a bias for what happened on set.
mm,
Speaking about this to one of our editors. There could be this moment, you've seen something on set, the lighting wasn't great. Ooh, you're thinking, oh, I really hate that shot, I'm never going to use it. And it could be like the editors, found that shot and actually it works really well. So sometimes having someone to just react and respond to that footage and let them kind of just react to what they've got
Mm,
might offer a different perspective when you
mm,
actually come down to watch it. And it might surprise you. There might be shots there that have worked really well that you just didn't think would work, and that's that true collaboration. They are a creative element in the process. So let them kind of get to that point first before working through them with them. I mean, it's not always possible, but that's the
mm.
ideal, essentially.
Which is, it goes back to your initial point, which is get in. If you're a director listening to this, get in early because, and
Yeah.
I think I love that point that you mentioned because I think a lot of people see the editor as the person who fixes the issues on
Yeah.
set when
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
actually it's like, no, editors are creatives. They are also like you. They want the best out of the story. They want the
Definitely.
best out of the footage. And I think, as you said, like, um you guys will see, the woods for the trees
Hmm.
because you have more of an advantage point because we're wrapped up in it and we're like, oh my god, we messed up, but it's like, no, this actually can work if we cut out this shot, and it's like, this is
Yeah.
great.
Exactly.
We have a question. Any advice on how editors can get their first opportunity with a director to start that relationship?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. It is. It is that kind of like entry point is so different for everyone. I think the main for editors that are looking to work with directors. I mean, we've all got people that we want to work with. Who we aspire to work with, and there's no harm in reaching out. I mean, social media is a big part of this. A lot of our industry, everybody is crediting each other. Everybody is sort of posting work that they've worked on. So there's an amazing database of people out there that you can find. So that there is that kind of way of discovering. So you could discover new directorial talent that way. So any editors that are looking to work with someone, I'd be using platforms like that to reach out. Make sure you have a portfolio, you have something to show. Um, and you might be really early days, you maybe don't have much work, and I think that is always a challenge. So there's always that kind of point where you're learning and you're developing and you're trying to make things off your own back to sort of showcase what you can do.
Mm,
And that's why I think it's always trying to find, especially when you're entering into this point, try and find people that are coming in at similar points, directors that are developing, editors that are
mm,
developing, and you're kind of taking a chance on each other to try and make something. You maybe don't have the work behind you, you know, you've worked with this brand or you've worked with this artist, you're kind of working with someone that you're both trying to make a great piece of work together, and you're both trying to get something for your portfolio. So I'd aim for people that initially that are kind of in that same plane. And again, it would be online. It might be events like Shiny and things like that. Those sort of
mm.
meetups that allow you to kind of like stumble across these people and start to form a relationship. So I think that's kind of where you start. But take a chance. But
Literally.
but that's also a good point, because I think don't be afraid to don't be afraid to leave to just reach out to people that you like. You might see there and they're doing amazing work. You're like, oh, there's no way they want to work with me. But there's no harm in like reaching out to people and saying, hey, I love what you're doing. We'd love to make stuff with you. That's director, editor, both.
Mm.
Directors reaching out to editors they really like, editors reaching out to directors they really like. You know, um,
On that
I
same
remember.
note,
Yeah.
how would any director, emerging directors, work with DOMA?
Mm, yes. I mean, the main thing is to reach out to us, to talk to us. In a really boring way, email us. With what you're trying to do and what you're working on, and we try to be really helpful. If it's not something we can do or take on at that time, we'll try. You know, I get emails from editors all the time. People entering into this industry looking for, you know, they might be looking for a position or something like that. And I do make note of these people that are entering and try and find, if we can't take something on, and I know that this person who's reached out in my inbox is also looking to kind of work with people, that might be something we link up. And then outside of that, it's all about timing. Maybe you've reached out and you've got something, and one of our editors, one of our lead editors is free, and it lines up perfectly, and we can kind of make a project work that way. We've also got amazing assistants and junior editors in house as well, who are amazing in their own right. And so I've just encouraged these directors to reach out to us, and we can have those conversations around the project. And we're here to kind of problem solve, like what you're trying to do, your timeline, and but yeah, we're always trying to partner this up in a way that works, and we're at DOMA, we're much as about development talent as we are kind of like the bigger names and things like that. We're all about development talent in house and development talent outside of the company. So I'm always looking for people to kind of partner up with or to support, and we do it all the time, in so many different ways.
Amazing, because then it means that a lot of people can then kind of get that experience, but then also get that advice and that sort of hands-on directly from
Yeah.
industry. I want to move into, I guess, advice for, because for a lot of the people, there might be editors watching, or but it also predominantly might be directors watching.
Mm,
So I want to ask, what advice do you have for directors? Like, just kind of from your experience of working with directors,
mm,
um, that maybe it's even common pet peeves that you might have
yeah, yeah.
with directors. What are things that you're like, if you do this, it will make the whole process easier, but for
Mhm,
some reason, it's just not being
mhm,
done?
mhm. I
But
think
also
what,
for anyone that's like just getting into it as well.
yeah, I think watch your rushes. And it's not that it's not being done, but sometimes people are busy and they've
Mm,
got and their first way they might be confronted with their footage is in the session, and then and I think the challenge is the director, the editor, might have to go and reselect things based on that kind of journey. I mean, it's not always possible, but know your rushes. Come into the session, know what you've shot, remind yourself. We'll get a string out to you, as quick as possible. But know your rushes, and come in, and with that in mind. I think that's a kind of that's a core thing. um maybe the next thing is like, it's a development side. Learn to trust your editor. This might be a new relationship, and there's always a sort of journey of like, learning how they work. But you've got to learn to trust the editor to process what you shot and find something in it, because that's the beauty of film. You partner with people because they've got a different perspective or a different take, or we're not about just sitting there cutting it and doing
mm.
exactly what you say. There is
It's an
you
art
know
form.
it is an art form, but this is why we all like film, right? You go to set, got the director, you've got the DP, you've got everybody's bringing something to the table, and that doesn't really happen, doesn't stop when you get to post, for lots of reasons. So I think, yeah, learn to trust and learn to give them space to kind of just find it, and then come in and let's work together and figure that cut out, and work through it that way. But yeah, I think core thing is just know your rushes,
Mm,
know what you're coming into, and just know your rushes, and don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're new to it, ask the post house how something works. Or talk to your editor about how they like to work, or you know, um, you're trying to get the best out of each other. Communication is key. You don't have to know We don't expect people walking in to know everything. You don't have to pretend that you know how things work here. We work with so many people in different parts of their career. So we're always happy to help, and we're always happy to direct on how we best see the process. And yeah, so I think don't be afraid to kind of ask the question as well.
amazing.
Yeah,
Because I think that's so important, because I think a lot of people are coming, as you said, are coming from different stages in their career, in their journey of becoming a director, or whether becoming an editor. Um, but I think that's great to have kind of sort of like an open sort of like communication. And I think
yeah,
also the point of ask your editor how they work, so there's not that kind of friction of Ooh, yeah, so there's not that
Sorry, I got a
there's
call.
so there's not that friction of just like um I guess expectation,
Mm,
so you know exactly who you're working with, what you're working on, and there's by them actually looking at their own rushes, the directors looking at their own rushes.
yeah.
I feel like that's a big one from you. I feel like that's I'm picking up that's probably a common issue, but also something to pass on to anyone
Yeah.
listening is watch your rushes.
Yeah, just factor it in. Do you know what I mean? Most people do. I think if you're like a curious filmmaker, you've just shot, you're gonna want to look at it. But just make sure. But it's the people who are too busy or sort of back to back and stuff. Just find time. Do you know what I mean? That's the main thing. But yeah, it's like just get to know where you've ended up on set. Totally.
In terms of, I guess, in terms of this might be a fly in the ointment kind of question, but in terms, and also anyone listening, feel free to run up some questions because we've got a few minutes left. In terms of like, I guess how the structure of so for example commercial and sort of like more narrative pieces or just
Mm.
in terms of the different genres, is
Mm.
there a major difference in, I guess, how the director will need to show up for those projects, or does it
Mm.
roughly look the same?
Time is a big factor. So the amount of time spent on different styles of projects could change things. And also, like commercials come in different forms. Some are, storyboarded, and you're sort of cutting to what's there. Some aren't, storyboarded, and you're sort of on a discovery phase, with
Mm,
documentary and things like that. So you might find that with commercial projects, you can kind of get in the suite faster because there's not as much material for the editor to work through, and you've got some boards to build from and work from. But with documentary and things and longer form stuff, there's a bit of discovery, there's a bit of time there that needs to
mm,
be the editor just cracking on and kind of working through that material, and then you know, coming in and sort of working through with them on stuff. I think I'd use your editor and your post producers and stuff like that to gauge what's the best time for you to come in the process. Depending on what the project is.
mm,
But
mm,
and there's lots of sometimes people don't want to come in, and we can share links and we do it that way. And and that can be helpful. There might be, I would recommend that, normally we'll get people in for this kind of like first cut, and hopefully we've got to a really good point. So when we're kind of working through any additional feedback after that, maybe the director doesn't need to be in and here in person. Maybe they do. It just depends on um, the project. So each one is unique, and I would use your editor and post producer to help you guide through, like, you know what is when's the right moment to come in and when's the right moment, because it just kind of depends on what's going on, really.
mm. Um, Thank you for that. I'm just going to quickly answer this question, which
Hmm.
someone asked, "What are rushes?" Sorry, English is not my first language. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah.
you want to answer?
Yeah, totally. Do you know what? When I first started in the industry, I was on a job, and then like someone was calling what I called footage rushes. And I was just eye rolling and being like, what is this terminology? This is all so like alien. It's just footage straight from the camera. What? But basically, rushes are the footage that you captured on set. So all the material, the files that you captured on set. So, you know, unedited, straight from the camera. Got all the thrills and spills of what happens either side of the camera. It's just the raw material that we get in and work with, essentially. Footage, you could call it, raw footage.
Amazing. Right. Well, thank you so much, Jay.
Cool.
Hopefully that was helpful for anyone listening.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I just want to hammer home that point. Watch your rushes.